Good morning, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend an hour of your day with us learning how to write winning abstracts for conferences. My name is Reshma Trasi, and I'm the Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, and Research at the Leadership Management and Governance Project. The LMG project, in short, is a USAID-funded project that strengthens and improves leadership management and governance practices to strengthen health systems worldwide. My co-panelist for today, co-presenter, is Carol Douglas, the Senior Communications Manager at Management Sciences for Health. Carol brings years of experience sharing tips on how to write powerful abstracts, and I'm thrilled to be co-hosting this webinar with her. Before we begin, I want to thank Sarah Lindsay from the LMG project, Sarah is also managing the polls for the webinar today, and I'll cue her in a bit to talk about it. And Kate Baye from the ICSC Youth Subcommittee co-chair for making this webinar happen. Our original audience when we started to think about this webinar was youth who are interested in submitting what could perhaps be their first abstract or their first of many abstracts, we hope, for international conferences. And we were really overwhelmed by the response that we got. As of earlier this week, we had 120 plus participants send in their RSVPs. But we did notice that everyone that registered is not necessarily a young professional. So we're hoping that we will still be sharing ideas and guidance that will be helpful for everyone that is going to be calling in. And we're hoping that those of you that work with youth will also choose to mentor other youth and encourage them to submit abstracts, both to the International Conference on Family Planning and many other conferences that are coming down the pike. So the format for the presentation today is this. We will walk you through the webinar in about the first 25 minutes or so, and we're hoping that the rest of the webinar can be used to answer questions as best as we can. Because of the large group of respondents that had come in for the webinar, we've unfortunately had to go with a less participatory or less interactive webinar as we'd originally hoped, but we're still hoping that this webinar will still be really useful and helpful to all of you. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk about ways to send in your questions and about the poll as well.
Thanks, Reshma. So as you all logged on, I'm sure you saw a poll pop up on your screen. We're using this just short poll to kind of gauge how many of you are planning to submit abstracts or have submitted abstracts, just so we have an idea of who's in our audience so we can kind of help tailor this to what you guys are planning. When you log out, you'll also see an exit poll. It should also be a short 3 questions just to help us improve. During the webinar, we're happy to take questions during some breaks, so we probably won't stop the live presentation, but hopefully the last 30 minutes we'll have to answer these questions. So if you'll please use the chat function, you'll see it at the top of your screen beside participants. That's a little bit easier for us to manage than the Q&A function. So if you use the chat function and type in your question, we will be monitoring those and trying to answer them as soon as we can and trying to get to all of them. Thanks. And we'll hand it back to Reshma.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. I think we're seeing some participants indicating that they're perhaps having trouble hearing. So those of you that can hear us, just give us a couple of minutes while we make sure that everyone that has logged in can hear us. So you'll probably hear a couple of minutes of silence, but don't worry, we're just trying to sort out the technology side of things. Sometimes technology works really well, and sometimes it doesn't always work. So give us a couple of minutes, and we'd really appreciate it if those of you that can hear us could just indicate in the chat window if you can. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Maria. Great. Excellent. Okay. So it sounds like we're getting to many, if not all of you. And Sarah is typing in some instructions that will help you to make sure that you can hear us clearly. Should we continue? Okay. I also just want to acknowledge a couple of other people on whose presentation we've built so as to bring you some of these tips today. These are Scott Kellerman, who is the Global Technical Lead for HIV and AIDS at the Management Sciences for Health, and Elizabeth Walsh, who was formerly the Communications Director at Management Sciences for Health. With that, let's get started. We continue? Okay. So, if you are like most people or like me and you have to write an abstract for a conference, this is probably going to be your first reaction. Know that sweaty palms and palpitations are usual and expected, and know that you are not alone. The first step, though, is to stay calm, because I think we've got a way for you to be victorious and conquer all your fears, so to say. And we're thrilled, really thrilled today to have the opportunity to share our experiences with you.
So in our brief time together, this is the structure of the webinar. We'll be talking about why bother with the abstract, what's it used for, how it's judged, and basically what goes into it. And in particular, what you want to do before you even begin. There's certainly a mindset, but also some ways to organize your thoughts that will really, really help in your planning and in your writing. And towards the end, we'll talk about learning objectives and a catchy title that will help grab the attention of your audience and get you into that conference. Basically, why bother? The abstracts they're a proposal. They're part summary of your project or research, and they're part advertisement for you, and why the organizers absolutely need you at the conference. They're your opportunity, in a nutshell, to show that your work, your program, or your research is relevant to the conference track. Sometimes people submit things that are a completely different subject. You don't want to do that. That what you're doing is original. You have something to contribute. That what you're doing is based on sound methodology that you can explain and show some significant results. Or at least it's likely to show significant results. It doesn't always have to be at the end of a program. But above all, that your contribution will be interesting. You are not going to be one of those people in whose presentation people are sleeping. That's what you want to convey in the abstract. So before you sit down to write, do check the conference website carefully, even if you've done this before, because they're all a little bit different. They'll describe the tracks and you need to choose. They'll describe all the boring things like formatting and how you submit and all that stuff. And on the other hand, and they might ask for extra things like a little essay list on what you expect to gain from the conference. And it all seems like boring details, but seriously, it's really important, because you can get knocked out automatically just by not having the right length, having some of it cut out, not having the right formatting and so forth, or missing the deadline. And this was brought to my attention yesterday. Depending on your time zone, check the deadline, because you might miss it by a few hours depending on your time zone. So you might want to also aim for getting it in, gosh forbid, before the actual deadline, but at least know when the deadline is. So the first step I would suggest is, seriously, what do you want to say? And you might consider having a peer or a spouse or a colleague ask you, so what do you want to say at this conference? And when we verbalize, we usually come out a little more articulate, most of us anyway, than when we try to write immediately without talking. So if you tell somebody your main points, 2 or 3 main points, you're more likely to be able to capture them easily when you write. So when you, I would suggest that after this, you might want to immediately sit down, write your main points, and you'll notice that they probably will follow some kind of structure like, well, when we came here, the situation was, and the problem was, what we did was, and what we found is, in other words, some variation of a format, which is a fairly standard format of challenge, action, and result.
So here's an example. We were talking about, well, what is it that we want to say? And here are 3 things that I would like to say as, what's part of the project that we're working on. There's an unmet need for contraceptives. Women, and especially people in rural areas in Uganda, have poor access to family planning services. There's also a shortage of trained staff. And private sector drug shops serve as the first stop for healthcare services for many people living in rural populations. So taking some of the principles that Carol was talking about, you see that just the sense of what is it that we want to say through our abstract covers a couple of things. This section here talks a little bit about the challenge that we're trying to address in rural Uganda, and this gives a little bit of a hint of what is the action or the solution for the challenge or the problem that we're currently facing.
Okay, once you have that down, you might want to think about your learning objectives. This is often explicitly requested, though not always, but it's a good idea to keep it in mind. This refers to, apparently, conference organizers say that people get this confused a lot. So this doesn't refer to what people are learning in your study or what you learn from your studies. It really refers to the conference. So you want to articulate what you want your audience to know or to be able to say or do by the end of it. In other words, for example, by the end of my presentation, participants will understand the contribution of private drug sellers toward meeting, etc. I don't have to read it to you. You can read it, but basically think about by the end of my presentation, what will people know, and how might it be relevant to their work? Useful to bear in mind even before you start. The next step is going back to your website and the suggestions and the requirements. They will usually have a structure that they want. They might even have, for the Family Planning Conference, they do have word counts for each little section. I think the Family Planning Conference has 5 or 6 rubrics, but commonly there are some variation of these for the background, which includes what was happening before you got there, methods, what did you do, results, and then a discussion, which might include lessons learned and next steps or whatever. So let's look at, for the background and methods, actually, you will want to be answering a number of questions. Actually, for all of the sections, you will be wanting to answer these questions. If you've ever studied journalism, they will look familiar. They're called the W's and H's. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if this confuses you, when this is over, just pick up any newspaper or go to any newspaper website, look at any news story, not a feature but a news story, and you will see the who, what, when, where, why answered in the first paragraph of the news story. But those are the basic questions that you'll be answering in your abstract. If it's not complete, if it doesn't feel like it answers everything, it's usually because one of these are missing. For instance, freshman.
So we're going to try and apply the W's and the H, like Carol just said, to this very large paragraph that you see in there. We've taken this and tweaked an abstract that MSH has submitted to the International Conference on Family Planning in 2013. So you'll see that the first paragraph, for example, that says contraceptive use is low, Only 26% of married women use a modern method. There is an unmet need. In rural areas, long distances to public health services and shortage of trained staff contribute to low use. This kind of gives you a sense of why. What is the problem? What is the context? Why should your reviewer or the conference care about the abstract that you're presenting? The second paragraph talks about the who. Who's the target group of your intervention or your program, and why is this target group important as well? So private sector drug shops are more readily found in rural areas. They often serve as a first stop. Their involvement is important to increase family planning, not only because they have a greater presence, but they also have an incentive to maintain a steady supply, less likely to suffer from stockouts, unlike many public health sector health posts or clinics. So this is also giving you a combination of who we're working with, but also why we're working with them. Let's go a little bit into the methods, and again, the same W's and H here as well. It talks about the project, and it's training drug shop operators from 4 districts, so that gives you a little bit of the where, to provide short-term contraceptive methods. It also tells you that we were recording monthly data for a period of 9 months, so that's telling you how often we were doing this. It's also telling you that the data that we were collecting was being collected from district health offices and village health teams. It also tells you how that data is being collected. So this, in a way, is that overlap of all the W's and 3 W's in this case and an H of applying this to the methods section. So once you've had a chance to write your methods out, go back and take a look to see if you have answered, in fact, the W's and the H, and you haven't left out any of the specific questions. And that we find is a really helpful check-in to make sure that your methods section and your background section is, in fact, complete.
As fun as it may be to write all about the methods, what happened in the program, how did you collect the data, what officials were involved and so forth, actually the results are probably even more important than that. Don't skimp on the results. We really want to know what happens, not just how you found out, but what happens. And we'll have another example with Reshma. And of course, in your conclusion, it could be lessons learned, it could be why it worked, why it didn't work, what next steps you may have if it's a program-based presentation, what next steps you may have in the program, and what words of wisdom you may have for other people tackling the same issue.
Okay, so let's look at the results section of the same abstract that we were talking about earlier. This really gives you a clear picture of the quantitative results. There's an indication of the percentage change that happened over the duration of the project. Getting a lot of feedback. Give us just a second. Okay. So this really talks about the clear quantitative results as indicated by the percentage change. It also tells you that over 75% of the drug shop family planning clients were using the depot progesterone injections. It also tells us the majority reported high satisfaction with the drug shop owners' services, said that they intended to get another injection. So remember that the results, in addition to the focus on the quantitative or the qualitative results you may have to show, really ought to link back to the introduction of the background and hopefully the title of what your entire abstract is. So that's one way of saying, it's not just write the abstract once and you're done. It also indicates that you do need to keep going back and making sure that your sections are flowing well, that your introduction is linked to the results, that your results are picking up from the title. So it does require not just writing it once, but perhaps writing it over and over again spending some time away from it sometimes I find helps, and then going back to it to make sure that all the sections are holding well together. And this frozen. Oh, still the same slide. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Sarah. The conclusion is a two-part conclusion here, and again embodies some of the tips that Carol was giving us. It helps to have the conclusion either talk about the significance and or a lesson learned. So for example, for this abstract, the significance was for other programs is that trained DSOs can be an important source of family planning services in Uganda. So the private sector really has a contribution to make, and that they are capable of providing services that show high client satisfaction. And the lesson learned from the programmatic side of it is that record keeping really with and submissions and routine submissions to the Ministry of Health are highly encouraged for accurate documentation. So that's one way of saying that the private sector is not a standalone component of the health system in Uganda, but making sure that the private sector is linked to the Ministry of Health and is moving some of the Ministry of Health initiatives and targets and contributing to the targets or the family planning goals is really important as well.
Okay. So in this particular conference, this is the lineup that word counts that they're asking for. And Rishman, I realize that this may sound very laborious. We're asking you to pay a lot of attention to categories and to refine your writing probably several times. But the good news is that once you've done this, you have a summary of your presentation. You will have really prepared for your presentation. Doing the abstract should really decrease the week before and night before presentation jitters, because you will have it down and you will have it presented in a very pithy fashion. We would also suggest that.
Next. Can we go to the next one?
Oh, we'll get to the next one. Right. So once you know what you want to say, a very important part that's often kind of not paid attention to is your title. But the title, as you know, as you'll notice when you're deciding whose presentations to attend, the title is really important. It can make the difference between a lot of people, between basically a full hall and a fairly empty hall. You might want to do it last. Some people do like to do it first. A lot of people like to do it last. You may definitely want to think of several different possible titles. They should be short, make them catchy. Even if you see a lot of boring titles out there, don't make yours boring. You can make it as interesting as you can. And again, you're more likely to get people there if you do. Here's an example of two perfectly acceptable titles, but you can tell from your own reaction which might work better. The first was, and this was actually used, Monitoring and Evaluating Radio and Television-Based Sexual Education in Urban Chile, Guidelines for Program Surveillance. So, you know, it's something about sex ed and radio and TV, so you might call that instead Sex, Truth, and Videotape, Evaluating Mass Media Sex Education. So you can make your own judgment on as to which might work better for you. And super important, as Reginald was alluding to, once you have your basic ideas down, it's time to probably rewrite. It's extremely useful to have a parent or a child or a grandparent read it, or even discuss it with them before you even start. But certainly have them read it. And if you see a blank look on their face, and they just hand it back to you without a word, you probably want to write it again, because you will be speaking not just to people who know everything about what you're talking about. That's why you're there. They don't know. So try losing the jargon, get rid of the acronyms or explain them, use specific examples, and the more, this applies to your abstract and even more to your presentation, the more you write and speak like you're talking to a real human being, the more effective you'll be. Also, of course, use that spell check and revise. You may expect to revise 2 or 3 times. It's totally normal and very beneficial.
You know, one other comment that I will make about the importance of using jargon, a lot of the conferences and the international conferences are really engaging communities, advocates, activists as part of your review committee. So if you are only writing to a scientific audience, which is also a very significant portion of the review committee, you then end up losing the vote of people that are activists and advocates. And that's why I think you have to find a way to really strike a good balance between putting together an abstract that sounds extremely academic, which might be appropriate for, you know, what has been a community trial or, you know, a community-based experiment or social sciences or behavioral sciences. But if you are, you know, if you have been doing a program, then you probably want to lose the jargon and, like Carol said, lose the acronyms and really write about what the heart of your program is really about. We had one question that I think I'll probably address at this point. There's the question on, well, you know, we have the methods section, the way that the International Conference on Family Planning and their guidance, it looks like the program intervention tested is 100 words and the methodology is 200 words, the significance background is 200 words. 100 words is not too many words to be able to provide all the details of the program intervention. What do we do about this? I have 2, I think, pieces of advice, and Carol will jump in as well. One, I think, is what helps us to look at abstract examples from previous conferences. These give you a really good guide as to what kind of abstracts have been accepted, but it also tells you how those that have been accepted have dealt with this word restriction, word limitation issue. What sections have they chosen to put into a program intervention versus what sections have they chosen to put into the significance background versus the methodology? Some of this is a little bit of experience, so it comes from just doing it over and over again. But I find when I'm writing abstracts to a conference, because the guidelines don't really shift, the abstracts that have been accepted at previous conferences are an excellent guide to look at and to use a similar format when I'm thinking about what should I be putting into my 100 words. Carol?
I would just suggest when you're thinking about the level of detail, just the most important stuff, and that's probably the thing that would jump out if a human being asks you, so how did you do this? And you start to explain. It's those details, probably the higher level details, probably that would be the most relevant. We can all go on and on about this, about what we did, but yeah.
We also had another question about, is there a word limit for the title? We didn't see a word limit for the title at the ICFP. However, there are other conferences that will give you the word limit in the guidance. So again, to Carol's initial point, pay attention to the guidelines. We're laughing as we're kind of sounding a little bit like school teachers here, but it is really an important guidance because you'll find that if you don't pay attention to those guidelines, you're probably going to be investing a lot of effort that's not going to result in much at the end. So if the short version, I think the other answer to that question, what do I do if there are no word limits to the title, is to be still as interesting and as succinct and concise as possible. Having been a reviewer on many international conferences, if I find that there's no word limit and the person that has submitted a title, the title goes into 4 lines, and what the person's trying to do is to try and cheat a little bit on the word limit that was perhaps more restrictive in other sessions. That is something as a reviewer that tends to grind. It doesn't mean that it's a deal breaker, or it doesn't mean that it is the grounds for accepting or rejecting an abstract, but it certainly makes a difference. And especially when there's a blind reviewer process, you want to be as interesting as possible. So keep those titles short, keep those titles concise, and to the extent that you're comfortable, keep those titles catchy and fun. Of course, if your project is, a specific scientific study, then absolutely keep it scientific. Should we go to the next one? Okay.
So we're coming up towards the end of our webinar. Keep the questions coming in. They're good. Just a quick review. We looked at why do this, what will it do for you, what you want to do before you even start writing, how to plan, and how to develop learning things that you might not ordinarily worry about in your work, such as learning objectives and a possibly catchy title. And now for some final guidance from Reshma.
This is just a little personal but funny touch, I suppose. One thing to clarify, submit before the deadline. I just want to reinforce that. I cannot tell you the number of times that people misread the time zone in which, to which you're submitting. Remember that the conference is happening in Indonesia. Make sure you're reading the guidance to make sure that the timeline for submission, and check whether that is a US-based timeline or if it is a local timeline, and calculate backwards. The other thing that you will find is, I think it's just human nature. We all tend to wait till the last minute to submit our abstract. You're not alone. We all do that all the time. But what that also does is if there's an online submission system, that system tends to crash. I cannot tell you the number of times at the International AIDS Conference this has happened. So another appeal for all of you to please plan ahead. Don't wait till the last day to submit your abstract. There will usually be an overwhelming presence on that online system, and those online systems sometimes are not able to take that load. So just keep that in mind. And once you've submitted, I find that a little bit of appealing to higher powers helps because you are essentially letting an abstract go, perhaps like a very caring parent, into a black hole of sorts, and you have to hope for the best and wait to hear back. We were also looking at the International Conference on Family Planning 2013's criteria for what the reviewers are looking for. And this is just a reminder on, how to kind of look at your abstract, or perhaps have somebody who's reviewing your abstract look at your abstract from these different, these 4 areas: the originality, the quality, the importance, and the presentation before you submit. I think that would be an incredibly useful tip. We've bolded the last one, which goes back to please pay attention to the guidelines. Yet again, there it is. There's almost a third of the criteria will be of your abstract will be accounting for the clear presentation of the material according to the outline provided by the conference. So it's something definitely to keep in mind. So with these last, I think, reviewers' perspectives from the ICFP, this brings kind of our presentation section to the end. When we started off, we were saying don't panic. Hyperventilation and anxiety is a natural response, but we're hoping that with these tips and some examples, we've given you all a chance to be inspired to submit, be brave, and remember that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Thank you very much, and we're now open for any questions you might have for us. So, we're looking at the questions that have been coming in. Is the conference targeting abstracts from program work or even academic work which may not exactly be program related? I think the clue that you probably want to use is to go look at the tracks and look at the subtracks. And if your work you feel could be made to fit to a certain subtrack, then absolutely go ahead and submit it. If it is not in any way or form related to family planning, then you may not, there's a very, very high chance that it's not going to get accepted. This is an international conference on family planning. So if you are doing something that is maternal and child health related, for example, and you can bring in the postpartum family planning component of it, then I think there's an absolute way of connecting your abstract to the conference's themes. But if it is working on a completely different field that is unrelated to family planning, you may want to reconsider it. But that's not to say you shouldn't be writing that abstract. There are many, many international conferences coming up. There is an HIV conference that's coming up soon. There are reproductive health conferences. There are TB conferences. So depending on what conference you're writing to, I'd like to think that the content of today's webinar is applicable to all of those. These are fairly generic tips and guidelines that you can use, and we're hoping that you will use those to submit to other conferences as well. So we had another question on, I have a few citations in my abstract. How do I deal with it? Should I keep the reference section or use footnotes? That's a very good question. I've seen different conferences deal with this differently. My apologies, I don't know exactly how the international conference deals with it. Two ways of doing this in any conference generically is to include it in the footnotes. Usually if you are allowed to upload a document or upload content, then the footnotes may be able to stay. However, if you are cutting and pasting into an access-based form to each of these sections, then the footnotes, you may not be able to put those in. So what I will suggest is most conferences that accept online submissions allow you to create an online profile and use that opportunity to go into the conference profile page or your profile page to get a sense of the format in which you have to submit your abstract. Is there a separate section for references? Is there a separate way of incorporating your citations? Usually conferences will have thought about this and will have their own way of working with it or not. Kate does have some guidance for you guys. It says you can upload a PDF with about 5 tables and graphs, and you can have your footnotes included there as well. Thank you so much, Kate. That's really helpful information. So we have another question. Can you include quotations, say beneficiary statements? So I'm guessing that this is a qualitative or a programmatic evaluation where you use some kind of qualitative methods and that there were beneficiary statements or direct quotes. I would say use your discretion. If you can use the quotes but lose the sentences and still keep it to your word limit, then I think you absolutely can use direct quotes. I think it would be very appealing to reviewers to be able to look at direct voices from the beneficiaries. But again, the word limit will be your decision-making point. So there's a question that says, what to include in the abstract, making it catchy. I would like to hear more of that, please. So what are different ways to make the abstract, as well as I'm hoping the title, catchy? And I'm going to turn to Carol here because it's just hitting up against my limitations.
I think catchy is probably most best applied to the title. The abstract is all about content, but I think you're going to get as close to catchy as you're going to get mostly by talking, again, by expressing it verbally to people. So have somebody ask you, what is this about? What's the most, answer interesting questions, like, what's the most surprising thing that you learned? What was different than you thought? Words of advice. That kind of thinking, rather than too much wordsmithing in the actual body of the abstract.
You know, and I think there is a fine line between making something catchy and trying too hard to be funny in the title. Humor can work in very, very different ways. So unless you're absolutely sure that the humor is appropriate, across cultures, and we all work with different cultures and we work across cultures, and the review committee could be coming from very different cultures. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So you're writing in a way to the conference guidance on one hand, but you're also writing to that faceless, unknown reviewer on the other hand. It's not easy to do, I recognize that, but at the same time, it's something to definitely keep in mind. If you have a question in your mind as to will this work, it might work with one kind of reviewer but with not another, and you probably want to stay with a safer option.
Another possibility is fly it by a number of different colleagues from different backgrounds. But again, the real interest is in the body of the abstract and in the presentation. It's not so much from the wording but from the content. What is really interesting about this? What's memorable? What's surprising?
That's really good advice. So we have another question. How many abstracts do you recommend sending per program? I am focusing on youth-oriented delivery innovations and model examining the innovations on SRH and FB under youth projects in the Reducing Maternal Mortality and Morbidity program. Do you advise I examine only one youth project under this program or strategically examine all other youth projects under the program in the abstract? That's a really good question, but it's also a really difficult question, I think, to answer without knowing what an overarching project-based or program-based abstract could then contribute to the conference versus what individual project-based abstracts might be able to contribute. You may also be limited by the conference guidance. I think we have seen that you are only allowed to submit 2 abstracts per person. Is that right, Sarah? Do you remember that? Okay, so it is 2 abstracts per person, so that's a limit that the conference is already placing. So it may be worth submitting perhaps one that is looking across all programs, and then maybe submitting one that is focusing on one program that is specifically linked to one of the tracks. I hope that helps. It's a hard question to answer without really knowing the content of what sounds like really phenomenal work that you're doing. So I'm hoping that helps somewhat.
Yeah, and to clarify what Reshma said, you can submit as many abstracts as you want. You can just present 2 of them, but you might not want to dilute what you're sending all these abstracts, and you probably don't want to send 10 in hopes that 2 get accepted. You just try to do the best quality that you can.
And I think Sarah is absolutely right. I think that the key word there is quality. If you feel that you have about a week and I think about 10 days, the abstract submission deadline is May 1st, as you all know. Again, check the time zone. It's sometime on May 1st, so you have about 10 days to get that abstract revised, written, and submitted. In the opposite order, written, revised, and submitted. So I think you want to think about how many you can practically get done before then and ensuring that they're of the highest quality, following a lot of, hopefully, the tips that we provided today so that you can increase your chances of getting accepted. How many people will review each abstract? I agree. It's usually 2 to 3 people. Different conferences do reviewers take into account reviewing responsibilities differently. Most conferences will have between 2 and 3 reviewers reviewing each abstract, and then the scores of the rating from each of the reviewers gets aggregated to figure out which abstract will get accepted versus not. So when the average scores are calculated for all the thousands of abstracts, there's usually a cutoff point per track above which abstracts will get accepted, and those below the average score do not get accepted, and you will receive notification around it. Can you please explain more on the spotlighted tracks in the topics? Under the topics, there are subtopics. Do they serve as a guide to the topic, or should we be writing to each of them? No, they serve as a guide to the subcomponents of the topic. The way that the topics are framed, or the tracks are framed, is very broad. So it's like demographic dividends. There's a lot of things that you could be focusing on under demographic dividend. What the subtracks tell you is what the conference organizers feel could be the area that is important or of high priority for them. So let's look specifically at the one on youth and adolescents. There are 5 different subtracks that the conference would like to feature abstracts and programs on. It's youth-oriented service delivery, innovation, and models, which it sounds like one of our colleagues who was asking about youth-oriented models, under the Reducing Maternal Mortality and Morbidity program could very well be writing an abstract to this subtrack. There's one on developing youth leaders. There's one on contraceptive use by youth, acceptability, use, and continuation. There's delayed marriage, delayed first pregnancy, and there's pre-adolescence. So if you've got something that probably does not fit to these 5 subtracks, you may want to see if there are other subtracks and other tracks that you could possibly be linking your abstract to. But the subtracks are a really good indication of whether the content that you have within your program is worth submitting to the International Conference on Family Planning in the first place. So again, definitely spend at least an hour or two looking very closely at the tracks, the subtracks, the format, and the guidance. I'm sorry, I sound like a stuck record, but it really is important and we can't repeat it enough times.
Sure, and one more component of this question is, what are the spotlighted tracks? So when you look at the ICFP website with all the tracks, you see a couple of topics are bolded. So this just means the conference is prioritizing this, that they want to see abstracts on this topic. It doesn't mean that those might be accepted more than the other tracks. It just means they're being prioritized. So don't feel like you have to force your abstract to fit into one of the spotlighted tracks, but if you have something that fits, definitely send it in. It's what the conference is looking for.
Excellent. So we had another question on, can you help us find the abstracts from the last conference? I'm on the 2013 conference website and can't find them.
Sure. So I've actually been looking at those as well. So on the 2013 website, you just go, you see in the sidebar it says sessions. So click the sessions and it lists every single session that was at the conference 2 years ago in Addis. And once you click the session, so say like 1.04 title, you click the session, then every single individual abstract that was presented in that session you will see. So feel free to email me, and you should be, and I can help guide you, but if you go to the 2013 website, which is this family planning, spconference.org/2013, you should see in the side, you see in the side under program, there's something called sessions. So you click that link, and it will take you to all the sessions, and then you just click one, and you can just scroll down. You don't want to click the presentations unless you want to see their PowerPoint, but if you just scroll down, you'll see the actual written abstracts broken down into background, methods, interventions. So hopefully you can see a lot of examples, you can see titles, you can see all the other things. So hopefully that will help you.
Not sure about that question.
So I think this question is asking, so just as we wrap this up, we will be sending a recording of this webinar to everyone so you can all see it. And I think someone's asking, will they be able to ask this question offline? And I think kind of the best answer to this is look to your support group. Look to your peers, coworkers, any mentors, supervisors, students, and share with them the criteria of your abstract, and then give them your abstract and have them try to judge it on that. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer a lot of individual questions offline. So I think try to use your support network and ask them, someone with a fresh pair of eyes, to read over your abstract and to judge it as a reviewer would judge it and to give you feedback.
Sounds like a plan. We're coming to the end of the hour, and it sounds like we've answered most of the questions that we had through this webinar. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank Sarah and Carol. This has been a fun webinar for us to put together. So I also want to say a big thank you to Kate Baye for helping us to, or encouraging us to please hold a webinar that could reach out to many of you as well. Before you log out, we have a quick exit poll, as Sarah mentioned, and I'm just going to do a quick plug-in. If we want to do more of these in the future, we would love to hear your feedback. So please do take the time to send us your feedback and give us any suggestions on things that you liked in this webinar and things that you probably would like us to do better next time. And to Carol.
And if you have any ideas that you would like us to go on as time goes by and you're preparing for the presentation, if you'd like us to do one on tips on preparation, for presenting and or tips on presenting itself, or PowerPoint, or dealing with audience questions and things like that, let us know if you're interested in that as well.
Okay, so we had one quick question that came in just as we were starting to wrap up. Do reviewers adhere strictly to the specified number of words in each section of your abstract? In each section of your abstract rule, the answer is a resounding yes. In fact, it doesn't even go to the reviewers. In most conferences where you have an online submission form, the section where you cut and paste your various sections is itself calculates the number of words you're allowed to put in. So if you put in even an additional word beyond your word limit, it will ask you to edit your words down at that point so you can even hit the submit button. So just to avoid heartache at that point, please do make sure that you're following the word count that's allowable. Oh, we have one more. Okay. Do you have any recommendations specifically for writing an abstract for a preform panel? That's a tricky one because preform panels don't usually have, well, preform panels, the focus is on the word preformed. It means that somebody is putting together abstracts. It's worth reaching out to your colleagues to see if anyone is thinking about a preform panel and has a topic area under which one of your abstracts might be featured. The other thing that many conferences, and including the International Conference on Family Planning, does is that even if you submit it as an individual abstract and it's not submitted within a preform panel, if there are many abstracts that hold together and align along a certain theme or subtopic that is of interest to the conference organizers, they do also pick up individual abstract submissions and ask if you would be interested in being part of a preform panel after submitting the abstract. So you've got two options: either start to coordinate with colleagues to see if you could be part of a preform panel that perhaps they are working on, or so go ahead and submit it as an individual abstract. And if your abstract is accepted, the conference organizers might then start to think about other panels that they may want to put together where abstract, for all you know, might be perfect. So we hope that helps. It sounds like we have to start heading out of this room, as you can probably tell with the phone ringing in the background. So just want to say one final round of thank you to all of you, and do please complete the exit poll so we can get the feedback that we need. Thank you very much.